Hello, everyone. I'm Vanessa Tinker. I'm a lecturer at Clegum Civitas and also an analyst for the Opportunity Foundation for Foreign Affairs. And right now, I'm here at the 3Cs Initiative, and I have the pleasure of interviewing one of our panelists. And here with me, I have James Carafano, and he's from the Heritage Foundation, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. Hello, James.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, and great to be in Warsaw. I
Yeah.
really feel, I feel like I'm in the center of the universe now because everything is happening in Europe, and it's all starting right here. So
You lucked out with the weather, so
Oh,
lucky you.
yeah, who saw that one coming?
Lucky you. Well, I have two questions for you today, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your insight and what your perspectives are. My first one is, how do you think the shape of U.S. military engagement in Europe should evolve in view of the challenges posed to the U.S. global position by Russia and China simultaneously?
Yeah, that's actually the question, not du jour in America. It's like the question every day in the United States, because it is true that, from the U.S. perspective, China is the pacing threat. It is the greatest concern. But Russia's part of the China threat from the American perspective, because the Chinese want in Europe what the Russians want. They want a Europe that is disorganized, destabilized, distracted, divided, because the Chinese take advantage of that. So a defeat for Russian destabilizing influence in Western Europe is actually good for the United States. The other thing is the United States is a global power with global interests. The Atlantic community it's part of our world. So we couldn't face China and have a disaster in our own backyard. That makes no sense. I think what's going to change is, and this is, I really think, groundbreaking, is the nature of the U.S. force structure in Europe, not the commitment, because I don't think that's going away. Doesn't matter if it's a Republican president or a Democratic president. America is in Europe to stay because transatlantic community, that's a vital interest in the United States. What's changed is Russia. The Russian military is significantly degraded. And so at the end of the day, I think one of the things that we learned is it is all about hard power. We can have little green men and cyber and buy your oligarchs and all the end of the day. But at the end of the day, what threatens our peace and security and prosperity is tanks rolling across the line. And that cannot be permissible. And so having that conventional deterrence against Russia is absolutely vital. NATO has to be able to defend NATO territory. That's not up for negotiation. A couple of years ago, we would have said, well, to really be comfortable with that, we needed maybe more American divisions on the front line. I don't think that's true today, because just the capacity of the Russian armed forces, ground forces, has been completely degraded. Yeah. I think what we've seen is the Russian Air Force is not really a threat. The Russian Navy is not really crucial. What makes Russia a real military threat to Western Europe is land forces that can take and occupy land forces. And so now that that's been degraded, I think honestly, the line that NATO has to reach to have an adequate conventional deterrence is lower. Part of that's because Ukraine's standing in the way. Yeah. That's going to be one of the most powerful combat experienced armies in the world. We just added, 800 miles of NATO frontier for Russia? They're not equipped to deal with that. The notion that they have to face the entire northern frontier. So I think just from the standpoint of a degraded Russian capability, NATO is more defensible. And as we see countries like Poland take self-defense seriously and really build up their capacity and capability, what's needed from the United States is presence. Obviously we have to have some U.S. forces forward deployed. Definitely in Poland, probably in Romania. I think those are really the two key to demonstrate that when you cross that line, you might as well be going to Chicago or New York. You've entered our territory. But that's, I think, in brigades, not in divisions, right? So I don't think there's going to be a lot more American force structure coming. The other presence really comes in the form of access. One of the things we learned from the Ukraine war is the ability of us to get over here and get to places to do stuff is so important. So if you think of J-Town, which I know has a real name, but Americans always do this wherever we go. If it's complicated, we just put a letter in front, and it's, in Germany it was Kaiserslautern, was K-Town, right? So now it's J-Town. I don't even know what the real name is. the ability to come in and set something up and do stuff, right? And so, for example, we see the Romanians have, significantly increased the number of places we can go in Romania. The Greeks just opened up 5 new spots for the U.S. to come in with air and naval forces. That's going to be an important part of U.S. presence. Enablers for like non-military people. These are all the things that make your military effective, whether it's satellites in space or the ability to do signal intelligence or command and control or logistics. The things that would make a Polish brigade on the ground much more effective. You see this right now in Ukraine. Part of the reason why the Ukraine military force is so good is they get intel, support logistics, and everything else. That's important. And I think really in the long term, the biggest one is capacity building, helping our European allies build up the capacity to defend themselves, whether it's selling them defense equipment or working with them in a defense industrial base for their industries to produce more defense equipment, training, which is, again, we've seen in Ukraine, the fact that Ukrainians are such better fighters than the Russians is. They have non-commissioned officers. They have officers that are just better trained. So that's the future of military presence in Europe. It's different than it was in 1989 when we faced off during the Cold War. But I think it's the kind of force structure that's going to make Europe much, much more secure than it was 5 years ago.
Well, that leads me to my next question. So is the United States able and willing to become more involved in the military economic support of the countries on NATO's eastern flank, primarily in the area of development support through the agencies such as U.S. Development Finance Corporation and the area of cooperation of companies in the arms industry?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. I think the answer is yes. And look, for the same reason why I think we're going to be engaged, as all in Europe, in long-term security assistance and reconstruction in Ukraine. And it's a terrible answer because it's the easiest thing to do. When politicians can't all agree on anything like NATO membership and EU membership, but we know we have to act in our own self-interest, what do? We take the easiest, least painful course of action. And the easiest, least painful course of action is to help build up capacity of nations to defend themselves and grow their economy. So I think security assistance and reconstruction for Ukraine, that's going to happen because we're going to have lots of difficulties agreeing on everything else. But I think the same way in terms of a more prosperous Europe, I mean, this is in America's interest, particularly North-South economic integration, free and open Black Sea, connecting to the middle corridor so we can link to the Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Central Asia, linking into the Eastern Med, secure Eastern Med, so linking into a secure Middle East across the Suez Canal to our allies in India and Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Investing in building up capacity of Southern Europe and essentially to own their own future. That's just the easy path for America. And to me, what's most exciting about this, and I think this could be true regardless of whether the future president is Republican or Democrat. What is very true is that the U.S. is a global power with global interests and global responsibilities. We worry about Russia, China, and Iran for the very specific reason that those are the countries which have the most capacity to destabilize the parts of the world that are most important to us. Western Europe, the Middle East, the Indo-Pacific. We're going to do things that enable those parts of the world to succeed. And we've seen this with Democratic and Republican presidents who are different political parties, lots of different ways of dealing with this. But the notion that somehow we have to keep the contagion of Russia and China and Iran from messing with our friends. I think what's interesting and different about this is rather than thinking about how do we stop the Chinese, how do we stop the Russians, how do we deal with Iran, we can think a lot more about how do we enable the countries that we want to work with to secure their own future. Many of these are in that whole post-Soviet space, from Finland all the way across Europe into Central Asia. For the first time in history, they can decide for themselves their own future.
Right.
They don't have to worry about being invaded by Russia. They don't have to do business with China. Iran's got its own problems. They can decide what who they want to work with, and we should be enablers for that. So I think it's an opportunity for American foreign policy to be, instead of something negative, how do we stop bad guys? It can be something positive. How can we work with our friends?
I find this refreshing actually to hear this, because I do agree with you that we tend to look at always the negative, like how do we stop something? And I feel like we tend to take more of kind of a Band-Aid approach rather than actually looking at it constructively. How do we help them help themselves? And, this capacity building. So it's really refreshing to hear that.
Or another way to say it, it's kind of like, how do you suck the oxygen out of the room, right? So how do you, why does a small little fire burn down an entire forest? Because it feeds on and it consumes everything. But if you take that away, there's no space for it to grow. And I think that's the future of peace and prosperity in the world. That gets us to a better place. I think the United States can play a leading role with that. I think Poland is actually an incredibly important partner, because Poland is at ground zero to all of this, whether it's linking with the Nordic and Baltic states, bringing energy from the north, the Three Seas Initiative, building a corridor, an economic backbone of Europe, connecting to the Black Seas, connecting to the Eastern Med, connecting through the Suez Canal, connecting across Georgia and Azerbaijan and Central Asia. This is
it's a land of opportunity.
We've never had a chance. Look, this is the world that should have emerged after 1945.
Yeah.
Didn't.
Yeah.
So we have an opportunity in our life.
Window of opportunity is there. The opportunity.
Right. That was good. That was good. I didn't get that, but that was good. Okay.
Thank you again so much for taking out time to have this chat with me. It's refreshing to hear your insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.